Morning, August 13th, and I've got another question for you. And this is actually a follow up to one that I posed several weeks ago, which was then was what do you do if you have only 1 week left? And then I suggested that actually it makes sense to change the time frame. What do you do if you've only got 1 minute left? Well, that's your top priority. That's what you do. That's the most important thing. That's the only, because that's all you've got. All you've got you've got 1 minute to do it. That's your top priority, and then you scale it up to 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, etc. And you can progressively add things in that are lower in priority because you can achieve them. You've got the time frame. But the follow-up question to that is, I think, as important, and it's one that most of us are not ever going to ask, simply because we don't think it's possible. And the question is, what would you do with your life if you had 1,000 years left? The logical response to that is, well, I'm never going to have 1,000 years left. Nobody's ever lived for 1,000 years. So, silly question. No, it's not. Yeah, you might not live for 1,000 years, but that's not to say you can't have an impact for 1,000 years. The question sort of is inspired by reading some of the Old Testament stories. You look at Solomon's Proverbs. Yeah, he's long gone, but we're still reading his Proverbs. What is it, 3,000 years later? 2,500? 3,000 years later? Something like that. He figured out a way to have an impact way beyond 1,000 years, even if he didn't live it. And you look at the prophet Abraham, who, funnily enough, when he was 100 and finally has his promised son Isaac, at I think it was 100, and he describes himself as good as dead. Yet, wow, looky here, I get to have a son when I'm 100. And look at his impact. We're still talking about him 3,000 years later. And it's interesting. He had that event seemed to have a disproportionate effect on his lifespan, because while he described himself as good as dead at 100, he actually lived to be 165. And he went on to marry again and have more kids. It had a strange effect on his physiology, on his mind and his physiology. They were prepared. God actually challenged Abraham. He says, "This is what I'm promising you if you'll believe me. Know for certain that your descendants will be mistreated for 400 years or 600 years. I forget the number. But your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. So what about me? Why can't I have an impact like that?" Well, the only thing holding me back from that, I suppose there's a lot of things that could be holding me back from that. Most of them I'll have no ability to control. I mean, Solomon wrote his Proverbs and had no guarantee that they were going to still be around 3,000 years later, but he wrote them anyway. He decided he would just trust the soup, trust the universe. It worked. So the only thing holding you back from having a disproportionate impact really is yourself. Think big. Think over a long scale of 1,000 years. What can you do that people will still be talking about 1,000 years from now? Yeah, you're probably not going to be around 1,000 years from now. But in their minds, you will be. What can you do? What can you accomplish? What would you do? How would you spend your life today if you knew you were going to live 1,000 years? Start thinking that way. Start thinking on that magnitude, on that time frame. Cool, eh? Interesting thought. Why can't you? Why can't you have an impact that lasts 1,000 years? Why limit it to 1,000 years? No reason whatsoever. Kirk out.